Welcome back to the Visual Arts Syllabus looking at the content. This is video number 3, looking at the frames. So the frames, what exactly are they? Well, there are 4 of them: the subjective, cultural, structural and postmodern frame. And essentially they are 4 different ways to look at and understand an artwork. So the kinds of questions we need to ask ourselves when we're looking at an artwork from each of the frames look something like this. If we consider the subjective frame, there are 2 possible perspectives that we can have. The first one is that we need to look at the artwork from the artist's point of view. Kinds of questions that we could ask are, why did the artist make the work? What made their emotional state of being when they made this work? What is the connection between the artist and the subject of the artwork? And as I said, the second aspect of the subjective frame is the consideration of how the audience thinks and feels about this artwork, or their perspective. So you're a part of the audience, so when you look at the artwork, what emotional connection do you have with this artwork? How does it make you feel? Are memories or experiences triggered as a result of looking at this artwork? Now, when we look at the cultural frame, it's a little bit more specific. It's looking at ideas and values that are shared by a group of people or a community. Now, it does depend on when the artist lived, their time in history, what their religious or social beliefs were at the time, and often they are framed by the ideas and values of those particular constructs. We can actually look at them in terms of power, gender, identity, politics. There's a whole range of different cultural constructs that we can actually think about when we look at an artwork. But it's important that you think about the artist, when they lived, and what was going on in their world at the time that would have or possibly influenced the making of the particular artwork that you're looking at. If you move across to the structural frame, basically what you're dealing here with are the physical properties of the artwork. What can you see? What are the visual clues that help us interpret what the meaning is within the artwork? And these clues are usually directly related to the composition of the artwork, which is how it's laid out, where things are positioned within the picture plane, the way the artist has used the materials, signs and symbols contained in the artwork, so on and so forth. But it's physically what you can actually see in front of you. Now, the postmodern frame is a little bit different to the other 3. It does not always apply when we're looking at an artwork, especially since postmodernism is a theory and it really takes place or emerges from the 1970s. So if you're looking at an artwork prior to the 1970s, chances are it is not a postmodern artwork. However, we sometimes find that artists or postmodern artists may use a traditional artwork from the past and create a new artwork reliant on the audience recognizing the original artwork. But we'll get into that in a lot more detail when we look at a particular lesson on postmodernism. So to come back to what I was initially saying, postmodernism is basically a theory where artists are deliberately challenging the constructs, which are beliefs and values of their world. And they use specific characteristics in order to do so. Characteristics like appropriation, recontextualization, parody, irony, and satire. Let's go back to the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci, and let's have a look at it in terms of the 4 frames. Now, I'm not going to give you specific answers. I'm just going to give you, I suppose, lead-ins for your own thinking about how you might approach answering a question that's a frames-based question, or thinking about it in terms of the frames, considering this particular artwork. He was a Renaissance artist, which means he was working the early 1500s. So we have a specific framework with which we can actually think about this work. But we need to think of it from his perspective and also ours. So we can ask ourselves questions like, how does it make me feel? What does it remind me of? What do I think the artist felt when he painted the artwork? What kind of person is he suggesting that Mona Lisa is through the way he's actually represented her? Then we shift across to the cultural frame and we start to think about important things like, what can we see in this artwork that reflects the time and place it was made? What cultural and social values, what beliefs can we identify by looking at the artwork? And often some of these details can be picked up purely through what the, in this case, the sitter is wearing and the kind of imagery that surrounds them. Now, if we move into the structural frame, we're looking for visual clues to help us understand this artwork a little bit further. We're looking at how it's composed, how the artist is using the materials, and what we can actually see. And finally, as I was saying earlier on, Leonardo, in this particular case, is not a postmodern artist because he's working in the 1500s and postmodernism happens in the 1970s and afterwards. So he cannot be a postmodern artist, and this artwork cannot be a postmodern work. However, many other artists have appropriated and recontextualized this artwork for their own purposes. Let me show you an example. Here is Queen Amidala from the Star Wars Episode 1. The very pose of Queen Amidala with the background very similar to what we see in the Mona Lisa. The artist who's created this artwork is deliberately making a visual connection to the original work by Leonardo. So straight away, because Leonardo da Vinci's artwork is considered one of the highlights of the portrait genre in Western art, by the artist choosing to put Queen Amidala in the same position with the same kind of backdrop, lifts this artwork to the same kind of status that the Mona Lisa has. We could go on, but that will do for this particular example. If we shift across to the example on the right, we have again a very clear reference to the Mona Lisa. In this case, we still see the Mona Lisa's face, but the artist in this case is making a very strong comment about war, about the destruction of the landscape, and this time we've got a female Mona Lisa, rather than being a compliant individual sitting and being observed. We've got her holding a gun, finger on the trigger, ready to aim if she needs to. So we start to get a totally different interpretation of what this artwork is about. So postmodern artists rely on their audience actually recognize the original artworks, and they create a new context built on the information of the old one. So essentially that is enough on an introduction for the frames. Further details will be explored in further videos later on. Thanks for listening.